Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have two returning guests. Their names are Paul and Phillip Collins. They've just published an article in Cultural Engineering Studies, and the full title of the article, if you're watching this on X, Rockfin, or Rumble, is Anglotopian Dreams, Science Fiction, and the Anglophile Milieu, 1871-1904. And I also had Jason Horsley on last week. We talked about his article, The Moviegoer, in the same online magazine, and I'll put a link to it. But this is not our first show. We've done two shows on their book, Invoking the Beyond, the Kantian Rift, Mythologized Menaces, and the Quest for the New Man. And then we did one with this whole character who popped up and then just seemed to disappear. This guy Grush.
Yeah.
The title of that one was Deception Through Disclosure: Decoding the Grush Enigma. And that was a very interesting event in the whole ufology kind of realm. But we're going to talk about this. We were talking the pre-show. I had done a show with Charlie Robinson about the Pilgrim Society and was really fascinated how interesting this article tied into my research with that. Arthur Conan Doyle, who kind of overlaps, who was a member of the Knights Templar and a member of the Pilgrim Society, and kind of part of this late 19th century science fiction that came out of the UK. But these guys can talk more about that. So Paul and Phillip, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you, William.
Thank you.
Awesome. So for people who may not kind of know your background, haven't heard our earlier interviews or know your books, maybe you guys could do a little kind of overview and what led you up to being involved in writing a paper or article for Cultural Engineering Studies titled Anglotopian Dreams.
Yeah, we've been doing the research for quite a few years now. I think going back to the early 2000s when we were working with Michael Corbin and the syndicated talk show host who did a closer look and published a few books back then. The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship, and more recently, it's kind of its sequel, and Invoking the Beyond, and both those books touch upon the Anglophile network. And but this I think this article really puts the Anglophile network more into sharper focus, and especially looking at the body of literature that they put out there to propagandize, not so much on the part of empire, and not so much on the part of preservation of the colonial dependencies, not so much on those imperial directives, but a larger, more a grander goal, so to speak, which would be the reunion of the Anglo-Saxon peoples, and that it's that vision that really led to today's globalist that whole ideology, the globalist ideology of radical homogenization and of world government, really came out of this notion that there needed to be a reconciliation between America and our racial cousins across the pond, so to speak.
Yeah, the window into that eschatological vision of this politically and economically unified world, and humanity virtually transfigured, the end of history. The window into that vision is really found in science fiction, particularly British science fiction. It was literary critic Uta Weldis who had noted that American techno-utopian science fiction exhibits some conspicuous homologies to the neoliberal discourse of globalization. One tends to find the same carefully prepared tropes and narratives in both American techno-utopian science fiction and globalization. These include a fanatical technophilia, an Enlightenment preoccupation with progress, an ostensibly beneficial depiction of global markets, the hopelessly romantic vision of a so-called global village, and the reciprocally connected narratives of a ceaselessly growing Pacific liberal politics and a global monoculture. The process of globalization began with the Anglophile network of Cecil Rhodes, whose roundtable groups would spawn the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the RIIA, and the Council on Foreign Relations in the United States, which was its stateside branch. And like its modern successor movement, the Anglophile network shared certain homologies with British science fiction. And chief among these is the trope of an Anglotopia, the eschatological hope of a racially unified Anglo-Saxon federation acting as a world government.
And even as the oligarchy here in the United States, our semi-submerged oligarchy began to fracture and splinter, especially around the years 1967 and 1968, where the oligarchs in the Sunbelt state began to pull away from the northeastern faction of the oligarch. Even then, that whole race patriotism of Cecil Rhodes, that Cecil Rhodes race patriotism stayed with the oligarchs in the Sunbelt states, stayed with the oligarchs there in what Kirkpatrick Sale and Carl Oglesby called the Southern Rim. Many of those oligarchs still had as their passion this idea of a world that was led by the Anglo-Saxons. So there was still some commonalities with the Eastern liberal establishment. The Anglophile dream was one of those things, and also
right, and that was very common. Actually, it was still okay to call yourself a pilgrim back then, and there was still a yearning by the Eastern oligarchy in the U.S. to be like their antecedents in the U.K. So the Astors were like across the Atlantic, kind of had many more connections, maybe more so than they do now. Maybe not, I don't know, but it really was different right there, right around at the end of the 19th century and the 18th, really when the UK was really at its apex, or the British Empire before World War I. So they were still writing. So some authors that you mentioned, people will know Arthur Conan Doyle, know of, but they may not know some of these other authors. Like you list a very lengthy amount of authors who were writing kind of on similar themes, this similar idea of bringing this kind of racial kind of groups back together, right?
Yeah, and you know, they kind of go about it different ways, and but it all lands in the same place in their books, and then their body of literature. It all lands at a reunion. I mean, like if you look at Frank Stockton's The Great War Syndicate, there's a military competition between the United States and Britain, born out of like a fishing rights dispute, and America wins the war, but they don't vanquish the British. Instead, the Americans bury the hatchet with their racial cousins, and they reunify. And then when you look at other pieces of this literature, like Julius Vogel's Anno Domini, you had a competition between the British and the Americans. And in this case, in this piece of fiction, the British win. The British win the military competition, but they don't vanquish the Americans. Instead, they bring the Americans on board as kind of a junior partner in a kind of Anglophile kingdom, a world kingdom, and all. So, you know, it was different paths, different literary paths of getting, but they all landed in the same place. You know, some of them had the Americans as the main protagonist, and some of them had the British as the main protagonist, you know, and some of them imagined the Americans being superior to the British. Others imagine the British being superior to the Americans, depending on which literary work you were talking about. They had the different group as a subordinate, but they all landed at this melding, this homogenization of the Anglo-Saxons, and it's kind of the kind of sinister part of this is that it's kind of subtly suggested. Well, if the Anglo-Saxons are coming back together, what about everybody else? What's their lot in life going to be? And so it's kind of subtly implied that it's not going to be as much of a rosy future for everybody outside of the Anglo-Saxon racial set.
Yeah, but what this exemplifies is this ongoing reciprocal exchange between the literary genre of science fiction and the Anglophile network, in particular the British variety of science fiction, and where that reciprocal relationship begins is very difficult to tell. Was it the Anglophile network informing science fiction, or was it science fiction informing the Anglophile network?
Yeah. You get into a kind of chicken or egg kind of debate. That's kind of a moot point.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to pinpoint where the origin for that reciprocal exchange. But what we do know is like authors like H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells followed very closely the career of Cecil Rhodes, and H.G. Wells' science fiction would allegorically convey the evangel of world government. Wells occasionally distanced himself from Rhodes on the grounds that they both conceptualized Anglo-America differently, but in experiment in biography, Wells conceded the kinship between his early work and Rhodes's imperialist message. Wells contended that the Rhodes scholarships were intended to disintegrate the borderline separating political affiliations, thereby allowing men of otherwise differing political persuasions to work towards the common goal of an Anglotopia.
And if you look at, there's a lot of truth to that, because you have a certain conservative set here in the United States that is made up of Rhodes scholars, but then you also have a lot of the liberal set that's made up of Rhodes scholars. You can find people on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, that are Rhodes scholars.
And if I'm not mistaken, I believe Carroll Quigley made a similar observation concerning the Rhodes scholarships. But ultimately, Wells viewed Rhodes as a fellow traveler who envisioned a new world order established upon the remains of the antiquated nation-state system. Now, during 1884 and 1885, Wells studied at the Normal School of Science in South Kensington under Charles Darwin's chief apologist, his bulldog, so to speak, Thomas Henry Huxley, T.H. Huxley. And Huxley has been identified as a founder of the Rhodes Roundtable Group and a lifelong collaborator of Arnold Toynbee. And Toynbee advanced this thesis concerning the perpetuation of global oligarchy. And he noted the inexorable decline of past empires like the Egyptian pharaohs, the Roman empires. He noted that imperial regimes could only be sustained through the initiation and tutelage of a priesthood of sorts committed to the precepts of oligarchy. And the British roundtable groups represented the tangible enactment of this prescriptive thesis advanced by Arnold Toynbee. But of course, T.H. Huxley was known as Charles Darwin's bulldog because he championed the theory of evolution. And Darwinism, when applied to the socio-political context, to socio-political arrangements, decrees an ongoing process of progressive homogenization among political, economic, and religious systems. On the Darwinian scheme, no one organism can lay claim to determinate properties. Instead, each organism is merely an intermediate form awaiting the next transformative phase. So as just as organisms are bereft of ontological fixity. Man is, as one of those organisms, as just another animal on the Darwinian scheme, is infinitely malleable, is a mutable creature. And likewise, all of the institutions and social constructs by which man governs himself are equally malleable. And the evolutionary terminus towards which they are migrating is absolute homogeneity.
And you see this in the fiction too that we look at in the article. There, all of these novels and all of these stories that a lot of these Anglophiles wrote seem to suggest that there's this inexorable drive towards, it's something that you cannot avoid, towards homogenization, towards Anglotopia. It's Anglotopia will be the end point, and there's no stopping it. It's just an unstoppable
it's
of
inexorably interwoven into the very fabric of the cosmos.
Yeah, one way or another, we're getting there.
Yeah, greater degrees of interdependence mean greater degrees of evolutionary development, and the glorious telos of this process is a one-world government. And one of the catalysts for this process is war, which comports with the Hegelian structure of the Darwinian scheme. A species, which is your thesis, falls into conflict with another species, which is your antithesis, and that precipitates adaptations, giving rise to a perfect species, which is your synthesis. So the Darwinian believed that war conformed to this structure. In fact, war was decreed inevitable by universal biological laws. And this comported with Wells's view of evolution, which was a sort of mutation precipitated by the confrontation between different species. You see this also intimated in War of the Worlds. Darwin himself had affirmed the inevitability of war on the basis of his interpretation of Malthus. And Wells, who was inculcated into Darwinism by T.H. Huxley, upheld the centrality of war to the evolutionary process. Wells appropriated evolutionary theory as the fundamental theme for much of his literary work. For example, the Time Machine. It presents readers with a future where class disparities have caused human evolution to branch off into two dialectically related species, two dialectically related branches.
Was it the Eloi and the Morgoth or something like that?
Yeah, and you see that kind of theme in the Anglophile literature, like in William Cole's The Struggle for Empire. You know, he says that humanity is basically broke up into those who have quote unquote great brain power and quote unquote those who had very little. So you have the Eloi and the and the Morlock again presented in a different literary context.
It's a very Manichaean bifurcation. One pole of this Manichaean binary is occupied by the lovely yet imbecilic Eloi and the evolutionary variant of man. This one luxuriates in an agrarian communist society, blessed with abundance and free from all toil of work. But the Eloi's utopian existence does come at a price. They are regularly subjected to predation at the hands of the Morlocks, a troglodytic variant of man that leads a subterranean existence. And you partitioned them off into this Manichaean binary. Humanity's descendants are consigned to interspecies antagonism that will presumably precipitate the next glorious phase of evolution. So you see where conflict between the two will result in the telos of the system, the glorious end of the system.
And if you want to know what the racial equivalent of a Morlock is in much of this literature, what we noted in our article is just how often the Slavic races are presented as the villains. The Tsar is presented as a villain. Russia is presented as a villain. the Slavs are just looked down upon, you know, in this body of literature. And this body of literature was really reflecting a very real fear that the Anglophile network that was spawned by Cecil Rhodes had. They were always afraid of the Russians because they couldn't tame them with naval power, and they were scared, I mean, out of their wits, that Russia and Germany would one day ally and become an unstoppable force that basically renders the Atlantic powers irrelevant and destroys the dream of an Anglotopia,
Right?
And all. So,
wow,
yeah.
This is after the Crimean War, right? So they
Yeah.
had already kind of wrestled with the Russian Empire at that time. Yeah, it really is something else. But one of the aspects is their optimism about it. Like, this is a positive thing, but they don't really pay any mind to what happened to people outside of the Anglo-Saxon sphere, right?
Yeah. There's always this question of what are you going to do with these other races, these darker races, and like the implication seems to be there that they'll either be slaves and like it, or they'll be gone, you know, and that's where you know the whole theme of eugenics, of course, comes in,
right?
And all, and I do want to point out, while some of it is very, very optimistic and just sees it as, you know, as the Anglo-Saxon race moving ever onward and upward, there is one exception to that rule in this body of literature. We didn't go over it in the article, but we're going to expand this article and come out with a new version for that we're going to submit to the Canadian Patriot Review and see if Matt Ehret wants to publish it. But one book that was not that optimistic was William Cole's The Struggle for Empire. And in that book, while he's an Anglophile, and he very much believes in the Anglotopian vision and all, he cautions the Anglophiles against arrogance, against being overconfident, against overreach, and makes some kind of sound warnings in that novel that clearly the network and its descendants today did not listen to at all, because he was saying you need to put the hubris to one side and, you know, moderate the way that you go about doing this, or you could find yourself defeated in a competition with the other races. And that's what happens in his book, is that the empire it moves into space and it tries to colonize this one hostile race, and the hostile race, instead of submitting to the Anglo-Saxons, just runs them over, betters them in competition. And it's a very, very violent book that just talks about the corpses floating around in space that, you know, that are the result, the product of all these battles where the Anglo-Saxons have lost. And ultimately, the Anglo-Saxons do win at the end with the help of scientists. But even with the scientists, they're not presented to us the way they're presented in other Anglophile literature, as these kind of these wonderful, glorious technocrats. Instead, they're presented to us as quite morally bankrupt and kind of cold and mercenary, and all, you know. And so Cole was basically trying to say, you need to moderate yourself. You need to pull back on the imperial impulse and all. But as we can see from something like the Afghanistan withdrawal, we didn't listen. The Anglophile network did not listen, did not heed the warnings, the sound warnings in that book.
But you'll notice that that's still a theme that runs through all of these, is the centrality of war to the process, and that centrality of war, that theme was very much also present in the work of H.G. Wells, who, of course, was trained by a member of the oligarchic heritage. And certain members of this heritage actively promulgated war, believing that conflict among nation states would precipitate the next evolutionary phase of humanity's development. This belief was rampant within the Coefficients Club, which was founded by Fabian socialist Sidney Webb in 1902. And numbered among the Coefficients Club's members was Wells, Leo Amory, Sir Edward Grey, and of course Bertrand Russell. Now, while Russell certainly had his fair share of repugnant beliefs, he was a Malthusian, a proponent of world government. He did justifiably object to many of the militaristic propositions that circulated within the Coefficients Club. In particular, he objected to Amory's bloodlust at the thought of a war with America, and Gray's advocacy of a policy of entente, which Russell believed would lead to another a conflict or several conflicts. And Russell's misgivings with the club weren't without substance. One member of the Coefficients Club, a gentleman by the name of Leopold Maxey, consistently promoted a militant stance against Germany before and after World War I. And Maxey believed that the Allies' 1918 victory represented a squandered opportunity to extinguish German power forever. And such warlike notions represented a point of departure between Russell and his club associates. Now, while Wells ostensibly regarded war with abhorrence, like he did in, for instance, The World Set Free, wherein he basically conflates the nation-state system with warfare. He calls it a cult of war, and yet, ironically, he suggests that the end to war is the only way to end war is by triggering a nuclear war, which was a contradiction in his bizarre way of thinking. But while Wells ostensibly objected to war, his continued membership in the Coefficients Club bespeaks an either unacknowledged contradiction in his thinking or some disingenuity surrounding his pacifism. Whatever the case may be, Wells's conviction that war was integral to the evolutionary process came to thematically define much modern science fiction.
And again, we see this in all the different stories that we looked at in the article. You see this this Darwinian militarism leading to Anglo-Saxon homogenization, whether you're talking about Frank Stockton's The Great War, or you're talking about James Barnes' The Unpardonable War, or Roy Norton's The Vanishing Fleet. All of these stories, almost every single one, it involved a major military conflagration, a huge war. And the war is what leads to reunification. It's like they see war as an inescapable component on the way to Anglotopia. It's in every single book across the board.
Right. But these are the social, economic, and political consequences of the belief system. One of a totalitarian, technocratic world state. What's the anthropological what's the anthropological consequences? What's the anthropological assumptions of this vision? Well, in order to give you some idea, one need look no further than Baron Edward Bowler Lytton. Baron Lytton was a practitioner of ceremonial magic. He also was allegedly involved in theosophy, which was, of course, founded by Madame Helena Blavatsky. But Baron Lytton believed that he was the keeper of a psychic energy that he dubbed Vril. And supposedly Vril was this electricity whose properties were the same as the great fluid with which all of life was pervaded. So it was kind of like this pantheistic force that pervaded all things in the world. And according to Baron Lytton's racial myth, an elite race of Vril people could harness this divine energy through mental practices, through physical practices similar to yoga. And Baron Lytton promulgated this racial myth with the publication of the novel The Coming Race,
which would also bear a significant influence on the Nazi movement in Germany.
Right, exactly. So it spawned this transnational movement devoted to harnessing and studying this supposed psychic energy. And some elements of that movement would play a role in the development and rise of the Nazis. Lord Lytton referred to the deific race who mastered Vril as Aryans, thereby adopting an appellation that was already employed by European intellectuals to identify a supposed master race of the past.
Yeah, that came from the remote past, you know.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, a gentleman who was kind of had an unhealthy preoccupation with the Nazis, a kind of problematic relation with them. Campbell, who wrote the Masks of God, put out the PBS series.
Joseph Campbell.
Man of 1,000 Faces, Hero with 1,000 Faces.
Right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Well, Joseph Campbell was also one of the spiritual advisors to George Lucas. And lo and behold, we see in Star Wars this notion of this force, this intangible force that pervades all living things, much like Vril. And, you know, yeah. And it's interesting to note that, you know, in the Phantom Menace, one of the prequels in Star Wars, Anakin Skywalker is birthed via this parody of Immaculate Conception. These organisms called midi-chlorians birth him out of nothing, and he's blonde-haired and blue-eyed. I'm just saying. So
right, and it makes him special. It's something in his own biology that sets him apart. So this is all very much goes back to Bulwer Lytton.
Yes,
you can trace the lineage back. Yeah, it's really something else. Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean the Aryan. So you can see the ideological overlap between Bulwer Lytton and Blavatsky. Both focus on the Aryan, right?
That's right.
So it goes up, yeah.
Yes,
and Chamberlain, which isn't part of your study, but it is interesting. In your article, I found it fascinating that these guys like Rhodes is reading this fictional literature. So they're engaged. I mean, this is a pre-film era where they're engaging this fiction in a factual thing. So I think you wrote about this blurred line between fact and fiction and reality, and how these fictional books are influencing the culture as a thought experiment, right?
Yeah, I recall in the article we also wrote, I mean, he, when speaking to W.T. Stead, brought up a piece of literature that had like this Anglophile secret society in it, and you see where that he was drawing on that as inspiration to start, you know, his quasi, you know, secret network in 1891 with the Society of the Elect, which starts off, you know, which starts off the Anglophile network and grows into this constellation that it becomes later on. You know, he's drawing from literature and drawing from and I can't recall the name of the book, but he drew from a book that, you know, shows this secret society of Anglo-Saxons coming together. You know, and that probably was the inspiration for his own secret network.
And that's a motif that you find. That's even a motif you find in modern science fiction beyond British science fiction. You find it also in American science fiction. But then again, you know, as you know, I pointed out in the beginning, these homologies that are shared between science fiction and the neoliberal discourse of globalization. They began with that interface between the Anglophile Milieu and British science fiction. You now find it here in the West with American science fiction and our various globalist machinations. You see this motif of a secret society, of an elite, for instance, in Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy, and in that this group of technocrats basically go underground and await the demolition of the world, so that they can once again reemerge to rebuild the world, to create a utopia. So kind of the endpoint of this elitist eschatology.
Yeah. The plan always begins in secrecy, and then at some point it's gradually externalized.
Right.
Even in the literature, you start to see it unfold in public. What was plotted in rooms away from the vulgar masses.
But this motif also resonated quite deeply and struck a responsive chord with the founder of Aum Shinrikyo, the Japanese cult that conducted the sarin gas attacks in Japan. That inspired them, because they viewed themselves as being the living embodiment of just such an elite, just such a secret society. So, in a sense, the sarin gas attacks was kind of a byproduct of this eschatological vision that can be traced all the way back to Rhodes.
It's pretty wild. The book you were mentioning, Rhodes, was an American politician.
That's right.
F.
That's
Marion
right.
Crawford. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
that's it.
Yeah.
Aided by an Anglo-American secret society. Well, their dream, how much of their dream became reality? If you look at 20th century real history, not the fictional science fiction, how much of this stuff that was gestated in the 19th century through science fiction became reality?
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, returning to William Cole's book, The Struggle for Empire, some of the things that he was trying to avoid in that book seem to be becoming reality now, as where we have this disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. We have this kind of rollback in the American empire that's happening violently. During the Trump administration, it looked like there would be a kind of a kind of orderly retreat from the world, as we started to return to more of a nationalist kind of orientation and all. But after he was expelled from power, we just saw it. We saw that rollback continue, but violently. So Afghanistan is the example that probably comes to most everybody's mind. Here we were there in Eurasia trying to secure the Eurasian continent, and using the GWAT as a pretext, and it failed miserably, and violently. So the only discernible plan that came out of that, the only part of it that looks to be orchestrated, in our opinion, is all these weapons that were left because they anticipated that the Taliban would use them against Iranian militias, we can leave these, we can bequeath these weapons, we can bequeath all this technology and all this equipment to them, because they'll fight our regional competitors. But that was it. Everything else was just disastrous. And you look at just recently when the Gold Star families came together to commemorate the withdrawal, and Trump had the decency to meet with them, but Biden didn't. And some conservative pundits say, well, that's because he doesn't want people to be reminded that this was his failure, and that might be true. But there's there's a larger reason that he probably didn't want to be, want to be seen by these Gold Star families, other than just that they would express their hatred for him. He was a representative. He was a representative of the empire, and commemorating this date would be a reminder that the empire is in decline. And and again, it's just all. This just all points to the fact that they didn't listen to what William Cole was saying in that book, where he was saying, throttle back on the hubris, and throttle back on your excesses. Otherwise, we're going to be have a terrible blow delivered to us, and that's what's happening. Yeah. That seems to be what's taking place.
As something else, another one of the more chilling technology forecasts in British science fiction that we now see today coming to terrible fruition, of course, was in H.G. Wells' book, The World Set Free, wherein he coined the neologism of atom bomb. That term was actually an invention of H.G. Wells.
Wow, and, I didn't know that.
Yes, and actually, The World Set Free was a heavy inspiration upon Leo Szilard, who presided over the Manhattan Project. And as a matter of fact, the Manhattan Project's system of experimentation and secrecy and its project classification system, that was derived from The World Set Free by H.G. Wells. And now, of course, we live in a world of nuclear blackmail. The advent of the atom bomb led to the dialectical manipulation of the Cold War, where with the Manichaean bifurcation of the East off into the kingdom of darkness, the West the kingdom of light, and vice versa. On the for the Soviet elites, they held that same Manichaean epistemology flipped, where they were the kingdom of light, we were the kingdom of darkness. And then, of course, there was perestroika, there was the ostensible collapse of the Soviet Union, and now what we're seeing is a world even far more predisposed to potential nuclear annihilation. Putin finding himself having to threaten more and more the possibility of.
He's been saying it for 2.5 years.
Yeah,
I got the nukes ready when they invaded in February 2022.
Yeah,
I have readied the nuclear bombs. He keeps saying nuclear.
Yeah,
so I don't know what the heck our leaders are thinking. Like in this crazy war.
And when an
overseas.
And when an F-16 of American import is shot down. You think they don't realize who is actively aiding the Ukrainians in their so-called struggle?
Right. The whole war started by the U.S. The U.S.
Right.
money and U.S. forces.
That's
all the way back
absolutely right.
to, really to 2014, even earlier than that. But the American people are so propagandized, they think that this guy Zelensky is on some freedom fighder.
Oh,
He's a total puppet.
Yeah,
coke-headed puppet, like stealing all our tax dollars. Yeah,
he's a cross-dressing cokehead, degenerate, and
just another loser, just like Kamala Harris, just this puppet. These guys are all puppets. Biden, Harris, Zelensky, they're all the same mold. They just want to have some idiot in front who'll do what they told.
And I think that with him in particular, he seems to me to be kind of a Slavic version of No Diem from Vietnam. And all, and we've talked before about my one teacher back in college that had worked with the CIA in Vietnam. He had an opportunity to meet No Diem when he was still the president of South Vietnam, and what my teacher described to me and the other students, and I, was a man who was defined by wretched excess. He had a woman under each arm, and neither one was the first lady, dressed to the nines and everything. And we see much the same with Zelensky. Zelensky, like the cars that he's bought, what his wife has, just
he has estates all over the world, in Tuscany, Miami. So he's got paid well for his job, because it's a big, huge kind of like circular money laundering operation. That's really what it is.
But it's going to collapse. It's going to come down, and it's just going to be another watershed moment in the end of the American Empire, which was supposed to be the blossom into this kind of world government, was supposed to deliver to us Anglotopia. In another region of the world, we have something that's not much different. We have Anthony Blinken going over to and telling the Chinese like that, if you ever try to absorb Taiwan, we're going to go against you militarily. We're gonna come against you in a military competition. But then you got Janet Yellen going over and saying, would you please still
more money?
Please still continue to buy our treasuries and everything, because we need to sell the new debt in order to pay off the old debt. And what are the Chinese going to say? We're going to buy your treasuries and in order so that you have the money now to
fight us. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
So now
the U.S. is about to flip over. Like, you can't sustain the debt, so the numbers don't make sense. So the Anglotopia is
we're not going to buy
Anglo-dystopia.
Yeah, we're not going to buy these things so that you can prosecute a war against us with the profit and all. So you can just see where reality is clashing against the majority of this literature violently. But then again, we go over that in the article, that this literature doesn't have a lot to do with reality.
Well, that's why
it's about the denial and suspension of reality.
Right. That's why we call it Anglotopian dreams. It is an allusion to what Eric Voegelin called the dream world, which is within a schematic, a vaporous schematic within the mind of the socio-political utopian, who basically amounts to little more than a modern Gnostic. They're dissatisfied with the structure of reality. They object to the structure of reality. They regard the world as a deceptive simulacrum. It's in their view, it's what Heidegger would have called Bestand, a standing reserve of malleable material that requires the enlightened fashioning of their own hands to become the new paradise, so something new. But like any dream, eventually you have to wake up.
Yeah, and you see the rebellion against reality, not just with this radical homogenization, that is unrealistic. Some of this literature, I can't recall the name of the book, but some of this literature actually had transgenderism, which is the ultimate rebellion against reality. Some of this literature had sex changes, and we can actually determine what we're going to be. So it's an all around denial of reality, not just geopolitically but biologically as well.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. It's really incredible what they were doing and their ties together. I mean, it's been quite the ride for the Anglo-American establishment, or the UK, US. I mean, it's really a remarkable event. These two countries separated by a large body of water, kind of still working in unison through World War I, World War II.
Yeah. But, I think that what the cohesion was, again, when you look at this literature, and the preservation of the monarchy isn't the main goal. The preservation of the empire is not the main goal. And these things are important to them, and certainly important to certain members of the Anglophile network. And I know that with Julius Vogel, the British imperial model is just key to him, and it's important that you keep it. But those are not the important goals. Above and beyond that is this idea that you reunify and bring reconciliation among all the Anglo-Saxons and bring them together under the same aegis, and they then when you have this homogenization, when you bring all the Anglo-Saxons together, you'll get the world of perpetual peace. You'll get the abolition of war. You'll get the banishment of human suffering. All of that will come, if we just bring the two racial cousins back together and get them to hug and make up.
They're the Vril people, the Aryans.
Right. There's a lot of the German stuff was adapted from the UK and US eugenics types, like these kind of types. I actually kind of grew up around these guys. There were schools named after some of these guys. It was Jordan and Terman and some of these other characters who were kind of mid 20th century eugenicists, literally. They scraped all their names goodbye, but they're kind of in this kind of realm, not very close, but it's really something else. Do you guys have time for a few questions?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, John asked, John Kershaw, is Russian cosmism inspired by these works and ideas? I have no idea.
Russian cosmism, we discuss it to some extent in our book, and we also discuss it in
part 2 of deception through disclosure.
Yeah.
We talk about
Russian cosmism. Was it inspired by some of this literature? I don't know. I think there are some.
There's common themes. Definitely.
Yes, there are some significant homologies there. It would be worth looking into. I might look into it myself. What I can say is a lot of Russian cosmism was derivative of heavily distorted Russian Orthodox theology, which at the time was pretty Gnostic. But the interesting thing about cosmism is you see elements of cosmism before it. I think one of its progenitors could be considered the latter-day neo-Gnostic space opera of the Enlightenment pamphleteer. What was his name? I can't believe it. Jacob Alevi, who basically promulgated this neo-Gnostic alien myth. And you see a lot of the thinking of NASA, that a lot of that is echoes of cosmism, the soteriological view of space, the transposition of the eschaton into space. All that began with Jacob Alevi, and it really reached its heights with NASA. But cosmism was kind of an intermediary phase of that way of thinking, this messianic view of space.
I guess one more similarity would be with cosmism, it draws upon a very bastardized Orthodox Christianity. Well, also with the Anglophile network, you had a kind of bastardized Christianity that they were drawing upon. A lot of the ideas that were popularized by Bagehot, Lee, and Lincoln in their book, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, seem to have informed some of the thinking, of the Anglophile constellation. This notion that Mary Magdalene had Jesus's children over in Europe, and so the Anglo-Saxons or the European peoples are the chosen, or God's chosen people, and not the Jews. That did inform some of the Anglophile network. So in both cases we have a bastardized version of Christianity informing the two parties.
Interesting. Another question: is denationalization a part of their elite utopian plans?
Yeah, because if nation states are what's dividing the Anglo-Saxon people, then what has to happen?
Yeah, you have
to break down the walls,
destroy those demarcations.
Yeah,
along national lines, and again, this is kind of their eschatological vision. They view absolute, complete, and total homogeneity as kind of the equivalent of salvation, the equivalent of the Christian soteriological view of salvation, of being saved, and with the complete and total erasure of all demarcations, you can now have the transfiguration of humanity. This new man emerges, much like what we see with Bowler Lytton's view of a vril people, or an enlightened race of Jedi in Star Wars, this deific race of man.
Gotcha. And so where can people find this article? It's on, it's the first edition of Cultural Engineering Studies, right?
That is correct. Cultural Engineering Studies. It's put out by Brett and Thomas with PSYOP Cinema. And I don't have the URL offhand, but you can find it definitely at their website.
I will put the link in the show notes so people can just click through and check this out, and the other articles. First edition is great. There's a lot of good things to read in there. And then your books, and where can people reach out if they have any additional questions?
They can reach out to me. I'm on Twitter. We also have a Yahoo email address, the thecollinsbros, thecollinsbros at yahoo.com if you want to reach out to us via email.
thecollinsbros at yahoo.com. And then I'll put links to your books and our earlier discussions about your book so people can click through that as well in the show notes. But today we talked about your article just published in the Cultural Engineering Studies, issue 1, titled Anglotopian Dreams, Science Fiction in the Anglophile Milieu, 1871-1904, with Phil and Paul Collins. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, William.
All right, stay there.